Dredge has been around for more than 20 years at this point, and yet it remains one of the game's most controversial mechanics. This video looks at how the archetype has evolved since 2005, and why Dredge itself continues to exist at the uncomfortable edge of Magic's design space. More than almost any other strategy, Dredge's history is one of adaptation, to bannings, to hate cards, to format speed, and to Wizards' shifting comfort level with the graveyard as a resource. While that might sound complicated, at a rules level, Dredge is very simple. If a card with Dredge is in your graveyard and you would draw a card, you may instead return that card to your hand and mill a fixed number of cards from the top of your library. Each Dredge card specifies its own number, ranging from Dredge 1 to Dredge 6. That's it. And yet this single replacement effect quietly violates one of Magic's core assumptions, that drawing a card is a net positive and that putting cards into your graveyard is a cost. Dredge flips this relationship on its head. The supposed drawback of milling cards becomes the primary benefit, while the act of returning a card to your hand is often incidental. Crucially, Dredge can replace any card draw, not just the draw step. It does not use the stack and cannot be responded to. It does not care about mana costs, and it scales in power purely by volume. From a design standpoint, this is disastrous. As Wizards of the Coast would later acknowledge, Dredge is nearly impossible to balance. Usually, high mana costs dilute a card's power, but not so with Dredge. No one cares how much Stinkweed Imp costs to cast. What matters is that it says Dredge 5. This is why Dredge sits at the very top of the Storm scale, alongside Storm itself. Like Storm, Dredge is not merely powerful, but structurally dangerous, because it rewards repetition, non-interaction, and extreme scaling. The designers did not realize this when they first made the mechanic. It was just meant to be flavorful. Dredge was introduced in the original Ravnica block as the signature mechanic of the Golgari, a guild defined by decay, recycling, and life emerging from death. When Mark Rosewater first made the ability, there was no self-milling involved at all. Other designers added the self-mill later to prevent players from being able to dredge the same card over and over indefinitely. That self-mill was intended to be a cost, since dredging too often risked causing you to deck yourself. However, they underestimated the upside, which is that Dredge feeds upon itself. The more cards you put from your library into your graveyard, the more options you have for future dredging. Still, in its original standard environment, Dredge decks were inconsistent and often underpowered. The card pool simply wasn't deep enough. These early lists looked more like mid-range value piles than the explosive engines Dredge would later become. At this stage, Dredge was treated as a quirky recursion mechanic, not a real win condition. That changed with the release of Time Spiral block in late 2006. Time Spiral's design philosophy was nostalgic, recombining old mechanics, revisiting dangerous ideas, and trusting experienced players to navigate unprecedented complexity. In doing so, Wizards printed 3 of the most important cards in Dredge history: Narcomoeba, Bridge from Below, and Dread Return. Narcomoeba rewarded self-milling by entering the battlefield for free. Bridge from Below rewarded creature death from the graveyard, creating an almost endless stream of zombie tokens. Dread Return converted disposable creatures into a game-ending reanimation effect. None of these cards cared whether they were ever drawn or cast normally. This meant Dredge now had formidable payoffs. The decks that incorporated these cards landed somewhere between combo and aggro, exploiting the Dredge mechanic to turn raw milling into both card advantage and tempo. The core objective was straightforward: Put as many cards into the graveyard as quickly as possible, because every card milled increases the pressure you can apply. The first format where Dredge fully coalesced into a dominant archetype was Extended. Early experiments like Dredgetog and Aggro Loam flirted with the mechanic, but they still played recognizably fair Magic. In 2008, a different take on the strategy reared its head. At Grand Prix Vienna, 4 of the top 8 decks were what players began calling icarid decks, named after the recurring horror that returned from the graveyard every upkeep. These decks used Dredge aggressively, not as a value engine but as a method of mass self-mill. They aimed to dump half their deck into the graveyard as fast as they could. From there, Icarid, Narcomoeba, Bridge from Below, and Dread Return formed a self-reinforcing loop. Creatures returned, creatures died, zombies multiplied, flashback spells stripped hands, and reanimated finishes like Flamekin Zealot for immediate lethal attacks. These extended Dredge decks demonstrated Dredge's alarming possibilities. The only thing that mattered was whether the opponent had graveyard hate and whether they drew it in time. In 2009, Dredge decks began posting strong results in legacy events too, in large part thanks to Lion's Eye Diamond. In most decks, LED is awkward, a Black Lotus that discards your whole hand. In Dredge, however, it's nearly perfect. Discarding your hand is not a cost when your hand doesn't matter. Legacy Dredge lists ran absurdly low land counts, relying on Lion's Eye Diamond to fuel explosive starts. A single breakthrough or careful study could mill dozens of cards in a single turn. Flashback spells like Deep Analysis turned LED into a ritual that also accelerated dredging. As a result, Legacy Dredge became infamous for its turn 1 potential. An even more striking case in point is Vintage Dredge. This format gave Dredge access to the perfect Dredge enabler, Bazaar of Baghdad. It's a land that produces no mana, but taps to draw you 2 cards and make you discard 3. With dredges in the graveyard, each activation becomes potentially 2 dredges for 0 mana. Indeed, many vintage Dredge lists abandoned mana almost entirely. Some ran 0 lands other than Bazaar. Others included Serum Powder solely to mulligan aggressively until Bazaar appeared. The deck's game plan was simply to find Bazaar, activate it, and let the graveyard do the rest. All this meant that when Modern was announced in 2011, Wizards of the Coast knew exactly how dangerous Dredge could be. Consequently, Golgari Grave Troll and Dread Return were preemptively banned before the format even began. This was an extraordinary move and a tacit admission. A fully powered Dredge deck might dominate the format if left unchecked. This meant that early Modern Dredge existed, but only in stunted form. While these lists tried to get the most out of cards like Bloodghast and Hedron Crab, they were far from Tier 1. The archetype got a significant boost in February 2012 when Dark Ascension gave us Faithless Looting. A decade and a half later, it's still the premier 1-mana enabler for graveyard decks, and honestly the single biggest reason Dredge can even compete in the current metagame. The card does everything you could possibly want. It's the only 1-mana spell in Modern that lets you both discard and draw multiple cards, outside of Burning Inquiry, which comes with its own set of problems. Looting allows you to dig for whatever piece you're missing, whether it's lands, dredges, or additional enablers. The flashback ensures that the engine never truly runs dry, giving you a reliable way to keep things moving even after the first wave. Once dredges are in the graveyard, looting's mana to mill efficiency becomes absurd, which is why the most explosive openings almost always involve chaining multiple lootings together. The package of looting plus the strongest dredges would form a pillar of Modern Dredge. The best legal dredger was and still is Stinkweed Imp, and not just because it has the highest dredge number available. Unlike most Dredge cards, it's also perfectly reasonable to cast. A recurring pseudo-death touch flyer does a surprising amount of work on its own, completely shutting down many aggressive starts while also providing a way to pressure through stalled boards. It pulls double duty as both engine fuel and board presence. Next is Golgari Thug. Thug has been a reluctant staple ever since Golgari Grave Troll left the format. In practice, it's usually just a Dredge 4 with very little upside, but it's still a body that can absorb an attack, and it does technically have text that sometimes matters. Then we have Life from the Loam. Purely as a dredger, Loam is the weakest card in this group, but that massively undersells what it actually brings to the deck. Loam generates real card advantage. It smooths land drops, makes multi-spell turns far more realistic, and enables repeated lava dart flashbacks in the mid to late game. Crucially, it's a dredger that can naturally put itself into the graveyard, which matters a lot in grindy, resource-light games. Finally, there is Dark Blast. This is effectively the last dredger on the fringes of playability. Its strength lies in efficiency. Killing a 1-drop while kickstarting your dredge engine is an excellent tempo swing. Most of the time it's pointed at X1 creatures, but it has plenty of flexibility, like finishing off blockers after combat, or even looping it to kill X2s by casting it on upkeep, dredging it back, and firing it again. The first truly successful reinvention of Dredge came in 2012 with the rise of Dredgevine. Rather than trying to reanimate massive threats or grind incremental value, the deck adopted an aggressively tempo-oriented game plan. The key innovation was Vengevine. By pairing it with recursive cheap creatures like Gravecrawler and threats like Scarb Ruinator, Dredge decks shifted their focus. The goal was to dump Vengevines into the graveyard, cast 2 creatures in a turn, and suddenly swing for 8 to 12 hasty damage out of nowhere. This version of Dredge cut older combo pieces and leaned into speed and surprise. It was fragile, explosive, and deeply unintuitive to play against, an early sign of the deck's future identity. Then, in 2015, Wizards made a bold decision. Golgari Grave Troll was unbanned in Modern. Many expected this to instantly propel Dredge into dominance. Surprisingly, it didn't. The format had grown faster and more hostile, graveyard hate was ubiquitous, and Dredge still lacked the redundancy and explosiveness needed to compete consistently. Still, this experiment would prove short-lived. Grave Troll was banned again in January 2017 because Wizards felt it made games hinge too much on sideboards. Deck builders continued trying new ideas in the years to follow, leading to a radically different take on the archetype, known as Zombie Infestation Dredge. This build abandoned the Vengevine package entirely. Instead, it focused on grinding advantage through Life from the Loam, Conflagrate, and Zombie Infestation, turning excess cards into board presence and reach. Squee Goblin Nabob provided inevitability, while Conflagrate gave the deck something it had typically lacked: a reliable way to close games without attacking. This was Dredge as a control deck, inevitable, recursive, and brutally efficient once it stabilized. While later versions would quickly ditch Zombie Infestation and Squee, the idea of using Conflagrate as a finisher would become a key part of many Dredge builds, including the one currently dominant in Modern today. The combo of Conflagrate and Life from the Loam pulls triple duty. It functions as removal, doubles as a legitimate finisher, and gives the deck a clean discard outlet when you need one. By returning 3 lands to your hand, Loam significantly increases Conflagrate's potential damage output. The next set to give Dredge new toys was Shadows over Innistrad, released in April 2016. The printing of Insolent Neonate and Prized Amalgam fundamentally redefined what the deck could do. Insolent Neonate doesn't look especially impressive at first glance, but what really matters is the sequencing it enables. Neonate lets you discard before you draw. That small detail is enormous. By pitching a dredge card first, you can replace the draw immediately and start dredging on the spot, effectively jump-starting your engine in a way very few 1-mana cards allow. At the same time, Prized Amalgam added a real threat. Unlike Bloodghast, which comes back unable to block, or Narcomoeba, which is just a 1/1, Amalgam returns as a full 3/3. That puts it close to Dredgevine in raw stats, but without the awkward deck-building hoops of having to cast 2 creature spells in a single turn. More importantly, Prized Amalgam meant the deck had enough free creatures to function at full power. Beyond a handful of cheap draw and discard spells, Dredge could now win games without ever meaningfully casting threats at all, echoing the way the deck operates in Legacy and Vintage. By October 2016, Cathartic Reunion pushed the deck further over the edge. 3 cards drawn, discard as a cost, and perfect synergy with Dredge replacement. A turn 2 Reunion could potentially dredge into multiple copies of Prized Amalgam alongside a Narcomoeba or Bloodghast. Such plays could at times be absurd. 4 to 8 creatures flooding back onto the battlefield for no mana at all, often ending the game in short order. This version of Dredge was firmly tier 1. Capable of overwhelming unprepared opponents by turn 3 or 4 with relative consistency. It was also the quintessential sideboard deck. Overwhelmingly favored in game 1, brutally fragile to graveyard hate in games 2 and 3. Its strength waxed and waned depending on how afraid the metagame was. The next few years were about refinement rather than reinvention. For example, Shriekhorn became a staple for a while, capable of milling 6 cards across 3 turns for 1 mana. Then Creeping Chill arrived in 2018 and quietly solved one of Dredge's biggest problems: dealing damage without committing creatures to the board. Basically, Chill is a free effect that rewards you simply for doing what the deck already wants to do. Creeping Chill is at its best in tempo-heavy games, where hitting 1 or 2 copies can outright swing the race or buy you the single extra turn you need to stabilize. It's also functionally uncounterable outside of niche answers like Consigned to Memory, which makes it a nightmare for control decks. 0 mana life swings straight from the library gave Dredge reach, resilience against aggro, and a way to punish opponents who relied on sweepers. However, just as Dredge was riding high, the banning of faithless looting in August 2019 came along to throw cold water on it. Looting had been Dredge's most important card. With it gone, Dredge lost speed, consistency, and resilience in one stroke. The archetype survived through improvisation. Merchant of the Veil and later Ox of Agonis helped patch the holes, but the deck was clearly weaker. Still, it refused to die, continuing to put up results in the hands of dedicated pilots. The early 2020s brought a steady trickle of new support. Silver Smote Ghoul, Otherworldly Gaze, and Thrilling Discovery gave Dredge new angles of attack and smoother openings. Then came 2024. Cephalid Colosseum, reprinted in Modern Horizons 3, finally entered the format, and, most shockingly, Faithless Looting was unbanned. Overnight, Dredge regained a massive portion of its former power, now augmented by half a decade of additional printings. Where older versions of the deck were built around flipping Narcomoeba into Prized Amalgam, or pairing Silver Smote Ghoul with Creeping Chill for incremental pressure, the post-MH3 engine is leaner. Instead of relying on 16 payoff cards, it now revolves around just 12. In addition to Creeping Chill, there is Arclight Phoenix, A hasty 3/2 flyer is simply on another level compared to the threats Dredge used to settle for. It applies pressure immediately, attacks over cluttered boards, and can even block when the situation demands it. Since the trigger happens at the beginning of combat, you have a lot of freedom to mill first and cast spells afterward, even if the phoenixes aren't in the graveyard yet. That flexibility makes sequencing far more forgiving than older payoff packages like Prized Amalgam, which demanded much tighter timing. Phoenix is also far from embarrassing to hardcast, especially against opponents who tunnel too hard on graveyard hate. Complementing the Phoenix is Lava Dart. Its primary role is to guarantee that the birds come back when you want them to. It's the only non-creature spell in Modern that can be cast from the graveyard for 0 mana, and it's actually playable removal. Defensively, it cleanly answers threats like Ragavan, Ocelot Pride, or Memnite, and if you can afford to fire it off immediately, it also picks off cards like Guide of Souls, Basking Broodscale, or Slickshot Show-Off before they spiral out of control. In races, Lava Dart often functions as an extra creeping chill. Flashing back multiple copies is a common way to squeeze out the last points of damage. 2024 also gifted the deck with Artist's Talent, and it's the single biggest reason the archetype has clawed its way back into relevance. It's a class enchantment for 1 generic and 1 red. Its first level says, whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you may discard a card. If you do, draw a card. Level 2 makes non-creature spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. And level 3 says, if a source you control would deal non-combat damage to an opponent or a permanent an opponent controls, it deals that much damage plus 2 instead. In other words, Artist's Talent functions as a repeatable engine, a way to sidestep common hate, and a stabilizing force for what is otherwise a fairly volatile high-variance shell. On its own, the card doesn't look especially impressive, but it becomes terrifying once paired with other enablers, or Lava Dart or Life from the Loam, letting you turbocharge your graveyard development. Untap with Talent in play, and you're usually able to fire off another enabler plus multiple Lava Darts from the graveyard, easily milling up to 20 cards in a single turn. Stack that with the rest of your self-mill, and it's possible to dump nearly your entire library at once if you get lucky. Just as importantly, Talent turns interaction into fuel. Discard spells, removal, and other reactive cards suddenly double as enablers, which is absolutely crucial in post-MH3 Modern, where failing to interact with explosive openings is a fast way to lose the game. Because Artist's Talent turns every instant or sorcery into an enabler, Modern Dredge finally has room to run real interaction instead of pure goldfish pieces. That means opponents can't always execute their game plan uncontested, which is a huge upgrade for the archetype. Talent also gives the deck a repeatable way to restart dredging, making it invaluable in post-board games where one-shot graveyard hate is everywhere. There's also a less obvious upside. Once fully leveled, Artist's Talent turns Lava Dart and Conflagrate into genuine finishes, and even gives Creeping Chill a bit more bite. This mode can matter a lot in hate-heavy games, especially when key threats like the Phoenixes have been removed with Surgical Extraction. Upgraded Lava Darts effectively become lightning bolts, allowing you to push well over 20 damage without ever attacking. So why does this package outperform what came before it? Why is the new version of Dredge better? It asks for fewer moving pieces, it delivers value immediately, and it sidesteps clogged ground boards entirely. At this point, Dredge is better understood not as an aggro deck with combo flourishes, but as a strange graveyard-fueled burn deck. One that goes off by dumping massive portions of its library, firing off Creeping Chills, and swinging for 12 flying damage in a single turn. Lava Dart and Conflagrate wait in the wings to clean up whatever life total remains. The trade-off is real, however. This iteration is more vulnerable to graveyard hate, and the format has picked up a few additional pressure points. Still, taken as a whole, the shift is a net upgrade. The current build is leaner, faster, and more decisive, and the benefits outweigh the added fragility. The deck is capable of pushing roughly 25 damage as early as turn 3, with plenty of reach left over if the game drags on. In certain matchups, Dredge can also pivot into a grindy card advantage role, burying opponents under recurring threats that don't care how much removal they're holding, especially against creature strategies, where Life from the Loam, Conflagrate, and repeated Lava Darts, amplified further by a fully leveled artist's talent, let you dominate the board. Despite its often linear game plan, Dredge is far from brainless. Sequencing is genuinely difficult, and navigating around graveyard hate, counter magic, and discard requires careful planning. It takes practice to know when to hold spells, how to react to what you mill, and how to fight through hate pieces. This means that, for all its explosiveness, Dredge is far from unbeatable. Modern today is relentlessly proactive, and even slower decks are built to punish any stumbles. On top of that, graveyard hate has evolved faster than graveyard strategies themselves. The moment Dredge starts sniffing tier 1 status, the format responds by packing answers and pushing it back down. Realistically, Dredge's ceiling is that of a strong tier 2 deck, shining primarily in metagames where graveyard hate is light and opponents are poorly positioned to respect it. That said, even if Dredge never reclaims top tier status, it offers an experience that no other deck in the format can really imitate. Its swingy, high variance nature is a feature, not a bug, for players who enjoy that style. The deck mulligans exceptionally well, to the point where starting on 5 cards often feels barely worse than 7. That gives you repeated chances to find explosive openers, and when you do, some games simply end on the spot. That raw ability to steal wins is what allows Dredge to maintain respectable percentages even against matchups that are, on paper, deeply unfavorable. Dredge also very much rewards format knowledge. Because it is so vulnerable to hate, success with Dredge often depends on reading the metagame correctly. Choosing Dredge for a tournament is a statement. You believe your opponents will not be ready or not ready enough. When that gamble pays off, the deck feels unbeatable. There is also a deeper psychological appeal. Dredge offers players the thrill of operating outside the system. It feels transgressive. You are not playing the game as intended. Every Narcomoeba that enters the battlefield for free, every creeping chill that drains life from nowhere, reinforces the sense that you have discovered something illicit and powerful. In this way, Dredge is not just a strategy, but a philosophy, one that looks set to haunt the edges of the game for a long time to come. Until next time, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and consider joining my Patreon. Also, you can use my discount code SerumVisions, all one word, to get 5% off your first Card Trader 0 purchase. Follow the link in the description for more information.